Welcome to A Cup of Gratitude with Amanda Schaefer. Hi, I'm your host, and I'm so glad you stopped by. This podcast is really for anyone, anywhere, anytime. And it's about taking a moment to slow down and look around and actually see all of the good things that are there. There's no question that asks, is your cup half empty or half full? But I think a better question is, what's in your cup? I mean, a drop of gratitude will benefit your life unimaginably more than a full cup of anything else. So let's settle in and take a look at how we can shift our focus and embrace the joy and the wonder of the life that we have. And once you start, you won't be able to stop seeing the good. And just like me, you won't be able to stop talking about it. And somehow that creates even more. Even in the midst of difficulty, even when it's really hard. Learn how to drink from a cup of gratitude. Welcome. Today I am speaking with Sherry Pilkington, who enters into various aspects of life as a daughter of the one true God. She dearly loves her 2 grown sons and 2 daughters in love, but it's her 6 grandchildren that keep her young at heart and the sound of joy in her laugh. Known for pondering the hard things in life through the lens of God's heart, she shares her revelations through her podcast, Finding God in Our Pain. Sherry and her guests do not shy away from the hard questions about the reality of pain and suffering and the good God we profess. After unexpectedly losing her husband in early 2018, whom she had been with for a little over 33 years, she now knows that God speaks beautiful things in the dark. Through her website, A Life of Thrive, and her podcast, she wants to let people know that they are never alone in their pain because God enters into the darkest of valleys and will gently shepherd each one through. Thanks for joining us today, Sherry. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you, Amanda. I appreciate your time and having me here. What a blessing to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
I appreciate you too. And you know what? I'm going to let the listeners in on a little something. So I don't know if we need a new nickname or something, or we're bonding for some future thing, but this is our third attempt thanks to technology, and we are not even recording in the way I typically do. So actually I have a video on and can look up and see Cher's beautiful face, which I typically don't do because I get distracted. And I want to sit here the rest of the time. I'll probably be looking down at my papers because I like to listen with the heart of God, because he has something to say, and this is his story. So I'm going to look down now, Sherry, and
That's
to
fine.
everyone listening, just know that we are going to make sure we share this. And we have had 2 amazing conversations so far, and they just were for us, I guess, and for God. I'm sure he really appreciated them. I think he was leaning in and having just such a good time too. But this is going to be the one that you get to hear. So Sherry, I do things a little differently here on my podcast. I like to start at the beginning and move all the way up through to what's happening now because I think it helps people see God in each and every story. Would you be willing to tell us a little bit about your childhood?
I sure can. I can do that. I grew up in, well, actually, my friend and I were talking about the difference between a house and a home. And I grew up in a house. We had provisions, we had food and clothing and a roof over our head, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But there was really no nurturing. And to my mother's credit, and I say credit because we never know the backstory to people's lives. And even with my mother, I can only imagine because her father passed at 13 and then her mother had to care for the family. And so she was the single breadwinner and had to
Mm-hmm.
rent out a room in her home to military men and just men in general. So I never know what my mother endured. But all that to say, we lead up to this. She, we found out later in life that she was bipolar. And then, even a little bit, when my sister and I got a little bit older, we discerned a second personality that would
Mm-hmm.
arise under stress. It would present itself. And so these are not things that we knew as children. So we walked on eggshells. I said this often. I left the house with more survival skills than relationship skills. And it
Mm-hmm.
was very traumatic. It really was. It was physical, mental, emotional. We did not have any sort of sexual abuse. We did not have any sort of drug abuse. But the rest of it is the part where it doesn't leave scars necessarily, but lasts years and years until you get
Mm-hmm.
help for it.
Yeah, honestly, first of all, I'm so sorry that was your experience, but honestly, I think it's the mental health issues. I think it's the traumas. I think it's the emotional. experiences that are worse than the physical, and they don't heal until we actually learn how to lean into them with Jesus. I know we can go to therapy and we can work on things a little bit, but God has a balm that the world just can't offer us. And having dealt with someone with bipolar disorder as an adult, I know how difficult that is. I don't really know how you did that as a child, and I am sorry that that was your experience. And one of the things I like to ask people who have a rough start is I see that God often peppers in people to encourage us, to give us solace. Did He give you any relatives or other people in your life who seemed like they were a safe place for you?
My Aunt Rainey, her name was Lorraine. We called her Rainey or Aunt Rainey. And she was the one in my life who modeled the heart of God well. She was
Mm,
consistent, she was faithful, she was nurturing, kind, gentle. She played the piano for church. So if we went to her house for anything, she always fed you, and it was an
mhm,
insult if you didn't eat. And she was going to play the piano, and you were going to sing hymns. And that's really why I still love the hymns to this day.
mhm.
So it was Aunt Rainey.
Yeah, I love her nickname. All I think, and I haven't mentioned this our other two times recording, but when I think of rainy, I just think of God raining down on your life.
Yeah.
I think it's wonderful that she was that constant for you and that she modeled Jesus so well that she showed you that there was something else. Because honestly, without that, I think your life would have been a lot different.
I do credit her for my salvation. Not that she is my salvation, but
Hmm.
because of the way that she modeled, God seemed attractive to me. Jesus seemed
Yeah.
like a real thing, not too good to be true, but something that you could really rely on because I saw it in her life. And so
Hmm.
that's one of the reasons why when the Lord, called my name and drew me to the front of my church, when I was 13 years old, 12 or 13 years old,
Hmm.
that was, Rainey had already paved the way for that meeting.
Yeah, let's put a pin right there to anyone who's listening. It just shows how powerful, pivotal, important it is that we walk out our lives after accepting Christ in a way that others can see Him. They can see the goodness, the difference from the world. I honestly never got to see any practical applications of people walking out their faith when I was little. I got to see people talking about God, but I never had an Aunt Rainey. And so I didn't know that that was even possible until so many years later. And I think it's just so important, especially with the next generation, anything that you can do to love them well and show them as a reflection, of who God is, show them that there is hope is so important.
I remember when I went forward and accepted Christ as my personal savior, made that public confirm or public what's the word I'm looking for? Public confession.
Hmm.
The way that I felt was so amazing. I
Yeah.
know some people don't have this big emotional experience or whatever, but I felt so light. I had spent so many years listening to how horrible I was, how dumb I was,
Mm,
how ugly I was. And yet when I did this, I fell in love with Jesus immediately. I did.
yeah.
I was in love by
Yeah.
that overwhelming love. And that's one of the things I pray for my children, my grandchildren, and people is
Hmm.
I'm like, Lord, overwhelm them with your amazing love.
Yeah. It's said in many songs and many different ways that it's his kindness that leads us to repentance, and it's so true. There's something about his heart that just fills us and draws us in a way that no person ever can. And you don't believe it's true until you feel it, and then you know it's true, and you don't ever want to live without it.
I'm glad that God just isn't a knowledge God. He's an experience
Yes.
God. And so
Yeah.
that to me is the beauty of having a relationship here on this side of heaven, that we can
Hmm.
have these little moments of in the Garden of Eden with him because of the intimacy that he offers us.
Yeah. Now, you had told me during our pre-recording phone call that you said that you noticed things were different in your house when you went to your friends' houses. And I was wondering if you might explain that a little bit. I don't think we know we're living in something unhealthy until we see that there's something else.
It's true. I don't think people know they're poor until they get outside of their their environment
Yeah,
and they're like,
yeah,
"Wow, she's got a Britannica encyclopedia set. What is that?" You know,
yeah.
that was back in the day for sure. Um, so for me, let me think. When I would go into my friends' homes, I would see nurturing. I don't even know that I would have called the
Mm,
word nurturing at the time. I wouldn't have said, wow, this is very nurturing, but they were
yeah,
kind. Their mother was very kind, spoke kindly to them, helped them with things. My friends could give an opinion. They could speak their mind, even if they were mad, and nobody got slapped in the face or knocked to the ground. And so I remember
hmm,
thinking, wow, this is really cool. But you can actually have a dynamic like that. You can have a
yeah.
relationship like that.
Do you realize how many times you've used the word kind? You used it when describing Rainey, you used it when describing Jesus, and now you've used it in these examples of your friend's parents.
It's funny. I always tell the Lord, God, you're so, so kind. Like
Yeah,
he's so kind. So I
yeah.
guess that must be a major word in my vocabulary.
Yeah, as soon as you said it a couple of times, I realized, and again, we're saying completely different things this time around than we did before. I think that you recognized that as something that you desired, and then once you felt it and encountered it, I think you didn't want to let it go, and nor should we ever have to. But it sounds to me like you didn't even know that was a possibility before, which is pretty wild.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know that I would have realized I was missing it. I don't know. I remember just
Yeah.
always on your P's and Q's. You got to read the room, you got to read the
Hmm.
situation. But the sad thing about it was you could never get ahead of it because it would still come at you
Yeah.
out of left field.
Yeah, living as a youngster with a hypervigilance and having to try to please everyone and make everything
Yeah.
okay. It's just it's not what we're meant for, and it's certainly too much for a young child. And our brains aren't even done being formed yet. And here we have all of this emotional baggage going on, physically affecting us. I dislike it when people say big T trauma and little T trauma. Trauma is trauma. If it traumatized you, it's trauma. And trauma sticks with you until you deal with it and until you take a look at it, unpack it, feel it, and release it. And unfortunately, there's really no other way but through. And most of us who have tumultuous times when we're younger, we just push it down and push it down like a little trash compactor. There's going to come a day where it's all going to come out sideways if we don't attend to it. So, um, tell me, there was something pivotal that happened though to you. You know, life went on kind of this way with you realizing the way that you were at home or in your house, as you said so eloquently, was very different than some other places. Your relationship with your mom was very different than with Rainey. Somewhere along the line, I think you just stepped into that was your everyday. But when you were 18, something changed. What was that?
The Lord would tell me, just speak into my spirit, hold
Mm,
on,
mm-hmm,
hang in there.
mm-hmm,
It's coming. And so I was thinking freedom from that's how I knew it was his voice and him leading me on because it was encouragement. It wasn't like saying dread something's coming. It was like, no, it's going to get better. Hang in there. And
mm-hmm,
so when I turned 18, I had my diploma. I was ready to get out on my own. I was trying to get my things together, get a job, which I did get a job, but then I needed a car and I needed a place to live, all these things. Well, then my mother got mad at me for something. And because I had my diploma, she kicked me out. And so I took my little, trash bag of stuff and I called my dad, which was also interesting because he had left the family many years before that and rarely saw us. But
mm-hmm,
anytime I called him, he would talk to me or whatnot. But very, very little interest in us kids. And it could have been that my mother kept him at bay. I don't know because to his credit, he never said a bad thing about her, even
mm-hmm,
though he had lived under the same conditions and eventually left because of those conditions.
mm-hmm.
So I got my little bag. He picked me up. And of course, he had left us for a woman who was only 7 years older than I am. So that's awkward. But he tells me, look, Sherry, you can't stay here. And I said, Dad, do you think I want to stay here? Do you think
Yeah.
I want to be kicked out? I was really trying to get myself together before she kicked me out. And so within a month, I got a roommate, I got an apartment. He helped me get a car. Now, granted, it was not the car I wanted, but I did not complain. I think it was like
Mm-hmm.
this ugly brown Chevy Nova four door, looked like a family car. And he got me a little bedroom suit, and it was flake board, but it was nice. I mean, it was brown, but I had mattresses, I had a dresser, so I was excited. So I
Mm-hmm.
said nothing about that. I just said thank you. And I paid my bills. I paid my car payment. I paid my little furniture bill. And so I was on my own at 18. And hey, if I had to eat tuna fish out of a can, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, or ramen noodles or rice, that's what I did. And sometimes I remember not eating, but never complaining, never thinking about, oh, I'm so hungry. So clearly I
Yeah.
had enough to eat because I never remember thinking, oh, I'm starving. I wish I had something to eat.
Mm-hmm. Sounds to me like you tasted freedom that tasted better than
Yeah,
extravagant food. Um,
that's true.
you 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 said something I want to go back to just for 1 second. You just talked about hearing his voice over the
Mhm.
years tell you to hold on. And I just want to make note that it was because of Rainey who modeled him and you went and you did finally accept Christ that you were able to hear his voice. Can you imagine what it would have been like if you hadn't heard Hold On?
Yeah, I don't know where my hope would have come from. And Rainey was always praying. She prayed for everybody, and she'd say, "I'm praying
Yeah.
for you." So I think she knew more than she let on that she knew,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and she just didn't overstep her boundaries. And I remember her when my father would leave, because he eventually left us for good, but he would leave and be gone 3, 6, 8 months at a time, a year. And I remember seeing Rainey slip my mama money and stick it in her
Mm-hmm.
hand, and so she was even looking out for my mother.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, she probably didn't make any waves so that she could stay in your life and do what she could do to make sure that it was the best it could be. And not much better you can do than lead somebody to Jesus.
Yeah, I agree. I
Yeah.
agree.
Now, during this time of kind of being the adult that sounds like you had been for quite some time, but living on your own, you told me that you connected with some old friends and you loved dancing. You would go out dancing with them, and they had some guy friends, and there was one particular guy who kept asking you out. Would you tell us a little bit about him?
Yes, that way again, my friends knew her group of friends. And so then we just cross hung out together. And we would do this like 3 or 4 times a night or a week, sorry, and just hang out in this group and have a good time. I don't remember anybody necessarily dating anybody. We were just all hanging out at the same time. And he kept asking me out, but he was also asking out other people. And it was no big deal because I wasn't interested. I'm trying to get out on my own. I'm trying to make sure I get my bills
Hmm.
paid. I'm showing up for work. Do I have gas in my car? Do I have my rent money? Kind of thing. So I just did not have time for any sort of personal relationships or anything else like that. But when we'd go out, him and I ended up sitting next to each other, hanging out, whatever, because we'd go to breakfast afterward. And we
Hmm.
laughed the whole time just over dumb humor. That's what I call it, dumb humor, because it's just simple things, play on words, poking fun at somebody. Like you see a quality in somebody and you call it out and like you nail it, over somebody's the way the hat they got on. Oh, look, there's Gilligan, kind of that's why I say dumb humor kind of thing. But we always almost read each other's mind with humor. And so I enjoyed that very much. So finally, after like 10 months, he says to me, I wish you'd go out with me. You're the only one I laugh this hard with. And I thought
Hmm.
about it. I said, we do have a good time every time we get together. I laugh really hard. I have a lot of fun, when I'm with him. So I said, yeah, we'll go out. And from then on, we just dated exclusively and then got married.
Well, they do say laughter is good medicine, and yeah, laughter can take you pretty far in a relationship, as long as the other things fall into order. So, how did you see God working during this time that you guys were dating, and what happened? Did y'all go further than that? Did you get married? Tell us
Well,
about it.
interestingly enough, I was so in love with the Lord from 12 to 18. I get kicked out of the house, and then I decide for some reason I've got to survive, and it is all up to me to make it happen. Don't ask me why I thought it was all up to me. The Lord has showed himself faithful many times. And so I leave him behind. I'm still talking to him every now and then. I'm not reading the word. I don't have a prayer schedule, anything like that. And so, as I'm dating, Larry has no reason to believe that I'm a Christian. And
Mm-hmm.
so, once we get married, I'm like, whew, finally settled down. Now I'm gonna, get my life together. I'm gonna get settled here. And so, I start trying to live like a Christian. And he's like, hold on a second. this is a classic bait and switch here, and
Mm-hmm.
I am
Mm-hmm.
not going for it because he was not a believer at the time. So
Right.
then I start to understand why the Lord says, do not be unequally yoked, because we had two differing opinions about
Mm-hmm.
where our marriage should go or how it should be conducted or whatever. And so
Yeah.
that was interesting, but that just drew me closer to the Lord as I tried to understand what was wrong. And because you got to remember, I'm still in survival mode. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
in relationship skill. I think I am, but
Yeah.
these types of things that I run into outside of the environment where I had cultivated these relationships, I mean, survival skills. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
running into problems and I'm thinking it's people until the Lord just spoke into my spirit. A couple of times, just talking about one time he used a snotty nosed little bratty child. And I was like, oh my gosh, I was at my wit's end with this child. And the parents, it was like 10 o'clock at night. They were letting him out, we were at that time doing motocross. So we were in a campground type thing.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I'm like, where are your parents? He's tired. The baby's tired. He's in there wreaking havoc in my motorhome. But
Mm-hmm.
anyway, long story short, the Lord just spoke into my spirit. That's you, sweetheart.
You
And I was
love when he
like,
does that.
and I just stopped and I paused and I was like, in my
Mm-hmm.
spirit, I'm like, what? And he
Yeah.
goes, that's you. You're
Yeah.
you're whining and you're crying over something I'm asking you to do, and I
Mm-hmm.
need you to blow your nose and clean your eyes. So I was like, wow, okay. So it was things like that where he began to turn that reflection on me to say, hey, this is an area I want to work in. This is an area I
Mm-hmm.
want to heal. At the time, I wouldn't have said, oh, he wants to heal this area, but I was like, no, he's not happy with me
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
this area. But no, and then I learned, of course, he's just doing it out of love because he's very kind. He's very tender. There's that word kind, tender
Mm-hmm.
about it. And he's so like, he only brings up what he knows you're ready to address, if you're
Yeah.
willing to address it.
Yeah. Well, before I agree with you wholeheartedly on that, because he only will do one layer at a time, and he does them in an order that we might not have done it, but it is the best way to do it as he gets from wound to wound to wound and he heals one at a time. But I want to go back to one thing you said. You said, I felt like during that time between, 18 after I left, that I thought it was all up to me, and I don't know why. And I
Mhm.
said, because that's what life taught you. It
Yeah,
was all up to you, but it's not. And so, when we have to then bring our life into alignment with God and have it all be up to Him and be the child and allow Him to be the parent, that's really confusing for someone who didn't have that modeled for them.
it's true. Your survival skills just kick in and you're on autopilot.
That's right. That's right. So, God being God, though, eventually your husband got saved.
Okay.
That's pretty amazing. Tell us a
Yeah.
little bit about that.
We went to, gosh, I wish I could remember because it was so classic back in the day. It was a traveling ministry that would come and give you this production on stage, and it would
Hmm.
give you a glimpse of heaven and a glimpse of hell.
Hmm.
Gosh, I wish I could remember what it was called. But anyway, he responded to that calling to come down and accept Christ as your personal savior. And so that's when he began to want to know the heart of God. And it was rough for him. It was a rough start. You know how it is. It's the maturing
Hmm.
process
Hmm.
of growing in the wisdom and the knowledge of God. And so I was really only a little bit further ahead of him, not even that much. But
Right.
we found our way through that. We had plenty of typical, I would say, marriage problems. I don't think our marriage was any different than anybody else's, but as I had shared with you before, we had way more good than we did bad. And I'm
Hmm.
thinking that's really what we can hope for, the
Yeah.
best we can hope for any of our relationships, just more good than
Yeah.
bad because we're so different.
Yeah, it's funny. I was in a small group Bible study at church this morning that I facilitate, and we were having a conversation about all of our different stories and how important it is that we all share because everyone is so unique. And the one person said, yeah, I know people who don't share their story because they always knew God, and so they feel like they went from good to good, whereas some of us have been through the Damascus Road experience where we've gone from really bad to good. And I said, oh my gosh, when I hear a story of somebody who goes from good to good, it gives me such hope that the next generation doesn't have to go through what I went through, that they could go through good to good. It's so valuable. And I think we all kind of put these lenses on the importance of different things as we go through life. But our story is the only one like it. And it's this combination of what God intentionally deposited in us to use for him and what the world spoke over us. And then he takes it and he works it all together somehow for our good in his glory. And it is useful to reach people with the hope of who he is, with the kindness of who he is, and make heaven more crowded. And I just think it's very interesting how some of us will kind of poo-poo what our story is, if you would. It's important. It really is.
I stay in awe of my podcast guests who have never wavered in their faith with Christ. That
Yeah.
amazes me because how
Yeah.
beautiful is that? They
Yeah.
believe that God is who he says he is and he's going to do what he says he do. He always has a plan. He's going to come
Mm-hmm.
through. I'm not saying they don't like have a little bit of anxiety about things, but their
Yeah.
bottom line, their foundational cornerstone piece is
Mm-hmm.
Christ himself. And there is a level of beauty and peace to that that
Yeah.
I'm in awe of.
Yeah. For me, it's like the depiction of hope that you could just always know him. How cool is that?
Right. Yeah.
But I think it's the same. If what you don't have, you think, what somebody else has is maybe better somehow. I don't know why we do that. It's, our minds and our hearts are crooked. They're wicked and they're not the way they were meant to be. And somebody can look at me and go, "Oh, I wish I had curly hair." And I'm like, I wish I didn't have this stuff. It is wretched to deal with, Like I think, or I want blue eyes, I want brown eyes. That person's body is so much nicer than mine. And I think we do it a lot more as women. I think the society has really done us a disservice. I think we look a lot at what people have that we don't have instead of looking at what we were given and knowing
Amen.
it was a gift. Yeah.
Amen. Yeah. And plus, too, when you accept Jesus Christ, that veil is dropped, if you will, and now we have direct access to the heart of God through his son,
Mm-hmm.
through Holy Spirit's,
Yeah.
downloads of wisdom, knowledge, discernment. And so now's our chance, our
Yeah.
opportunity to discover God's heart with regard to how he created us. Before we've
Mm-hmm.
been blinded by sin, our flesh, and not that we won't still struggle with the desires of the flesh, but
Mm-hmm.
we can discover new things about who we are in the context of how God created us. How did
Yeah.
he make us in his image? In what
Mm-hmm.
ways? What specialness about himself has he given us? About his
Mm-hmm.
character and his nature? How has he shared himself with us?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And we all have different things that he's given us as special gifts for us to use. I love being creative. And when I get to create and I realize that I'm just the tiniest bit like him there, I can just feel him smiling when I'm working on something. When you take nothing and you make something out of nothing, like in what better way are we a reflection of who he is, right? The one who made everything out of nothing.
And I think too, the passions that he's given us, the way that we enjoy, like you're saying, you're creative.
Hmm.
Some people, like hanging with people. But I think that's one of the ways God gives us a quality, a skill, something that we
Yeah.
enjoy in order
Yes.
to offset anxiety and depression. But yet we
Hmm.
don't take the time to really explore those things about ourselves or spend time doing them.
Well, yeah, especially nowadays, there's no margin in anyone's life,
Mm,
and they're
yeah.
just filling it up and filling it up. And whatever free time we have, we're, looking at Netflix or we're scrolling on our phone. And when I say we, I try really hard not to be doing those things. But overall, it's part of the culture and it's there, and it's so easy to just push a button and you're in another world. I was having a conversation with someone the other day about their story, and they were talking about how they were in this position and they didn't know why. They picked up the remote and they clicked it and they were ready to receive Christ at that time. And there was this pastor, he had already gone through his sermon, so it wasn't the word that was for them, but he was giving the altar call and she accepted. And I said, as soon as she talked, I said, immediately God showed me the Enoch, in Isaiah, who's sitting there and he's ready, but he doesn't understand something. And so he transports his servant directly to him to explain everything. He receives it with joy. He gets baptized. I was like, that little button was him transporting a servant right to you as soon as your heart was ready. And she went, "Oh my gosh, I never thought about it like that. And that's why I love being in discussion together as we share our stories and look back, because sometimes God will give the other person a perspective you never thought of.
Agreed. Yeah. So good.
Now, you had told me about a vision that I want to talk about, because sometimes God gives us a vision and we can't understand it, or it doesn't come to fruition right away. We really don't know what to think about it. So he had given you this vision of what you thought was being on stage with the book. You said you felt like you were raised up in some way. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I was going through a life crisis at the time, and I was just crying out to the Lord, saying, Lord, am I going to live? Am I going to die?
Hmm.
What is my future supposed to look like? Do I have a future? And then He gives me this vision. And again, I'm the reason I say stage is because I was up, like I'm looking at myself kind of raised up a little bit. So I'm thinking stage because there's an
Hmm.
elevation to my appearance,
Hmm.
and I've got something in my hand that looks like the shape of a book. I have
Hmm.
somebody who looks like have just given it to me or something. They're standing right there. They're smiling with me. There's somebody in the back. So it's a joyous occasion. And I look like I'm holding a book or some sort of award or something.
Hmm.
So I began to talk to the Lord about what's in my hand. And He
Hmm.
never did say what was in my hand, but I began to talk to Him about writing. And I was like, Lord, I don't write anymore. I wrote in school. And He's like, and He just downloaded in my spirit. He reminded me of the times that I would participate in contests and I
Hmm.
would win them. I wanted the prize, which is why I was participating, not because I wanted to put my writing on display or anything like that. And so I was like, okay, honorable mentions, first place. I won,
Hmm.
some other prizes, some cash. And then he also reminded me of how my friends would come ask me for help with any of our English classes, language arts kind of things, spelling,
Hmm.
pronunciation. And so I said, okay, all right, Lord. That was something that came more natural to me than any of my other subjects. But I
Hmm.
don't really care about punctuation anymore. I don't remember what the rules are, and I don't really care. I'm too old for that. And he spoke into my spirit and he said, that's why you have editors.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Exactly.
So from the gist of the way this conversation was going, I don't hear God's audible voice, but
Hmm.
there's like these downloads in my spirit. I'm talking and I'm
Yeah.
getting a download, like I'm hearing
Hmm.
another side of a conversation. And
Yep.
so I began to position myself for writing. So I
Hmm.
absorb myself into the writing community, which I absolutely loved. We're a
Hmm.
quirky bunch, but I love them. And I learned so much about the writing process. But I'm thinking, if you're going to be an author, Sherry, you need to have a book. Well,
Hmm.
the Lord wasn't giving me a book, wasn't giving me a book. I entered little writing contests and I won certain things. I was published in a couple of anthologies for
Hmm.
microfiction. So I had some fun. I created a program for the local nonprofit writing
Hmm.
writers group, and I participated with them, supported them. So long story short, I'm still waiting on a book, but the Lord didn't give me a book. And this is about now that I'm 60. So this has been about 30 years ago. And
Hmm.
so I still know, but well, I find out about blogs. They've been out a little while before I actually discovered them or took them serious, I guess. And so I said, well, you know what? That's a bite-sized bit of info. So I committed to the
Hmm.
Lord. Lord, I'm going to do a blog for you. I
Hmm.
set my date. My daughter-in-law, one of my daughter-in-laws was trying out photography at the time. She didn't know if she's going to like it, but she was trying it out.
Hmm.
She did a fantastic job. So she was going to take all the pictures for the event. My other daughter-in-law was an event planner. She plans everything for March 3rd. So we're
Hmm.
all ready to go. Well, on February 21st, my healthy husband, not a lazy bone in his body, passes away from a
Hmm.
massive heart attack. And so I did not have anything to say for like 5 days. I mean, I
Hmm.
acknowledge people, things like that. I mean, my children, I talk to them, things like that. But I was just dumbfounded. I was
Yeah.
shocked. I was stunned. I was dumbfounded. And so I really wasn't even saying much to the Lord. I just didn't have any words. As a matter of fact, before my husband's funeral, because I requested an autopsy because I was like, somebody's going to have to tell me what happened to my husband because I don't understand
Exactly.
this at all. He was the youngest of eight. There was no one
Wow.
in his family who had any health issues. There was a sister, though, who did have cancer, but in that time, it was in remission. So,
Hmm.
long story short, I find out it's a massive heart attack. And I told the Lord, I don't know what you want me to do with this. I finally commit to doing a blog, to
Hmm.
writing, like I feel like you've been asking me to do, and you pull the rug out from underneath me.
Mm.
What the heck am I supposed to do? And of course, and he does this, and he knows I don't like it because I'm looking for more direction. And he said, what do you want to do? And I was
Mm.
like, I don't know what I want to do, Lord. I don't even have a brain right now. So I don't trust myself to give you an answer right now. And as I'm saying that to him, I just knew in my spirit I had to. So I said, I do know this, Lord, that if
Mm-hmm.
I don't go to this launch for this blog post, this
Mm-hmm.
blog, I will never write again. I'm never picking up a pen again. I'm leaving all the writing groups I support and where I'm at, and I'm never writing again. I don't want to even look at anything to do with writing. And so I said, I'll go, but I have no clue how this is going to turn out. And it turned out well. I didn't give the message that I wanted to give, but the majority of people there knew what I was going through. And so they were
Mm-hmm.
very kind to me. They were very sweet. Um, and so I managed. My whole blog is a life of thrive,
Mm-hmm.
revealing the beauty of Christ in everyday life. And if I couldn't
Mm-hmm.
stand up there in the worst valley I'd ever been in and give a
Mm-hmm.
message that Christ is still good, which at that time I'm not sure I believe
Yeah.
because I'm like, how can my good God not feel good? And I'm talking like horribly not feel good, not just, oh, I didn't get
Yeah.
to go to my dinner plans tonight. So that was a whole nother, point to wrestling well with God.
Yeah. Two things. One, I feel like you went ahead and listened to him and went anyway. So I feel like you postured yourself in a bowed down way. I think of Romans, I offer you my life as a living sacrifice. You didn't understand what was happening, but you understood who he was, and that was proven by being obedient. The other thing is, and his word says he lifts up those who are bowed down. So the lifted up is interesting. Um, I also want to say that when you were talking about the being raised up and holding this thing in your hand that you thought was a book, we've had this discussion before, so I've heard that part of your story before. I never thought of this before, but I wrote down, use what is in your hand.
Mm.
Just like with Moses, he had one staff that he used to use for just using it as a staff. But look at the miracles God used the staff for, our everyday thing that we have in our hand. And I'm thinking about your blog and your podcast and social media. And we've talked a lot about technology and these different things. And I often say, when I'm holding my phone, from which I do a lot of my sharing the gospel. Before I've made it to my computer for the bigger items, I do a lot of it on my phone and I'll hold it and he'll remind me, use what's in your hand. And so I just want to share that with you. I feel like that is part of the story, to use what he has given you, your everyday things, use what's in your hand. And it very well may be a phone. It might be a book. I honestly can see a book in you. And I think that sometimes we have to pray into these visions for years. I think of Joseph, and his vision made no sense to him. He probably shouldn't have told his family right away, but God used that to get him where he needed him to go. It probably could have gone another way, but I do think that God gives them to us so that, number one, we know he's speaking. Number two, we know he has a plan and a purpose. And number three, we know he will know best how to get us there.
And to your point, it may not have been a book in my hand, but he needed me to walk through that to get where I am today. Like the
Mm-hmm.
whole idea of going back and writing copy
Mm-hmm.
and words
Mm-hmm.
and promos and all that
Yeah.
stuff. If he tried to put me into a podcast,
Mm-hmm.
having to know all that stuff too, I would have
Mm-hmm.
probably pulled my hair out because I needed to get back into the writing world. I needed to get back into understanding that. And so I don't know that it is a book. All I
Mm-hmm.
know is that it prompted me to
Yeah.
posture myself so that I
Yeah.
could move forward into a podcast. And now there's another business that I'm looking at developing.
Yeah. And I'm telling you, he literally put 100% scripture. He lifts up those who are bowed down in my mind and spirit when you were talking about that. So this bowed down posture of, okay, I'm going to obey you, God, is where you were lifted up. And so that is how he works.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we will leave that there. So I am very sorry about your loss. And I'm grateful that you're giving a voice to your pain, because there are a lot of people in pain. There are a lot of people grieving. There are a lot of people who have loss and they can't seem to find God in it, or they can't stick to the fact that I know God's character is good and it's kind and it's loving and it's perfect and it's, all of these things because I'm looking at my circumstance. And when we're on this side of heaven, it's really hard to think in God's terms, which are much bigger. It's hard to maybe say, what a blessing that you had your husband as long as you did. The
Amen.
different perspective shifts.
Mhm.
That's, we probably would want to shake somebody if they said that to you in the beginning. But as we grieve, and that's a continual thing, if you really loved someone, you're really going to grieve. And that doesn't go away. I think it comes in waves. But I do think that we can find goodness in the difficult things, and we can find God in our pain, just like you said. So tell us a little bit about how you started to do that.
I think the one thing I remember is I wouldn't say argue with the Lord. The Lord knew my pain, that it
Mm-hmm.
came out in anger a lot of times, or at least very vocal. I wouldn't say, well, yeah, I was angry at times, but he was never afraid of that. Like when I would
Mm-hmm.
just pour out uncontrollably in my pain and lash out,
Mm-hmm.
where were you, God? And as believers, we have a framework to question God with. Like, Lord, your word says, no evil will come near my tent. Well, I just want you to know evil came in my tent and it blew up in my
Mm.
tent. Who are you in this context kind of thing? God never, when he knew that all I wanted was an argument, he never
Mm-hmm.
engaged me, but he never turned his back on me. He never left me. He never shamed me. And so you will hear me say now that your pain is safe with God because he will not use it against you. And he's so kind like that because he's patient and gentle. When he says that his yoke is light, that's what he's
Mm-hmm.
talking about. He's not going to add any more to that. One of the things that I did in just being honest and transparent with the God, because you're not going to hide anything from him, but I
Yeah.
also left room for him to speak into my belief because a lot of them were lie based thinking. Now, at the time,
Mm-hmm.
Satan is working overtime in order to put a wedge between my reality and God's truth. And when I say reality, reality isn't always truth. Our
Mm-hmm.
reality can look like one thing, but God's truth can be a completely different thing. And
That's
so
right.
Satan is constantly trying to drive this wedge between me. And so I would only give my anger and my pain but so much space without giving God an opportunity to speak, which is why you will hear me say, God speaks beautiful things in the dark, because he
Mm-hmm.
said things to me and gave me revelation in certain things that I would have never known in any other context.
That's right.
And so, if you're honest and authentic with God and you trust him with your pain and then give him room to speak, I think that's crucial. It was for me. And his word, hang on to his word. At first, I wasn't going to church for a while. I didn't go to church for over a year after that
Mm-hmm.
because I
Mm-hmm.
didn't want to go back to our church. I tried. I just couldn't do it. And
Yeah.
then I wasn't really praying. I was talking to God constantly, but I wasn't really praying. And I wasn't praying for anybody, but I was listening to worship music and I would offer up my little, how does the Lord cover me? A joyful noise unto the Lord. That's how the Lord covers me when I try to sing worship music. I can't
Mm-hmm.
sing, but that doesn't mean I won't sing. And so he would just inhabit your praise, just like his word says, God inhabits your
Mm-hmm.
praise. And
That's right.
so I went from believing that God never leaves us, forsakes us, turns or anything, to knowing that he
Mm-hmm.
doesn't turn
Yeah.
away or leave us. That was
Yeah.
powerful for me.
That is powerful. And another powerful thing I wrote down that you said, when he knew all I wanted was an argument, he would not engage with me. That's love.
That is love because in that painful place, he knew what I really wanted. He
Mm-hmm.
knew I wanted my husband to come back. He knew
Mm-hmm.
I wanted everything back like it used to be, but I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't going to get that. And so he has the heart and the ability to sit in the tension of
Mm-hmm.
your immense pain, but
Yeah.
yet not, what do you want to say? Not give you an answer, not like
Yes.
he's not worried about his reputation because
That's
his
right.
presence is sufficient. I
That's
learned
right.
that, yeah, in that
That's
moment.
right. And his long suffering is for your good.
Mhm.
He's patient.
Mhm.
in the waiting, there is working. I always think about, I'm a gardener. I love plants and things. And if you're not, you might not get this, but a lot of times when you plant a seed, it looks like nothing's happening. The first part of a seed that begins to grow are the roots. And so it goes down before it comes up, and you can see it on the surface. And so that's what he's doing. In the waiting, it might
Mhm.
appear like nothing is happening, but something's happening. He's giving me this other memory, so I guess I'm supposed to share it, of a time when my perspective needed to shift. And so I was at a retreat. I was out by the water. You'll always find me by the water if there's a chance. I was just there with my journal alone. And I was looking out over, it was fall and it was beautiful. The trees were beautiful. The water was sparkling with the sun. And I'm just looking at the top of the water and the reflection of the trees and just in awe of how beautiful it was. And then something went like this, just made like this little shift of motion. And I thought, what was that? And I looked, and right there, exactly where I had been staring, but underneath the surface of the water was a giant fish. It had been there the entire time, but I was so busy looking on the surface that I did not see it until it moved. And so I think sometimes we just do not have a real perception of all of the things that are alive in the depths of the moment.
And something worth mentioning, or might be worth mentioning, is that that seed had to die in order for it to give life.
Absolutely.
So that's that
Yeah.
dying to self, you know.
Yeah. And one seed will create a crop,
Mm.
and it all comes, it's just the way I always say God's a gardener because it is the way everything he does works. Yeah. Now, see, these are things we did not talk about yet again. This is our
Nope.
third very in-depth conversation. The two of us probably could have a podcast together. I don't know. So, uh, you told me about something that I really got excited about, and I want to make sure that we have time for it before we finish up. You had this idea, vision, dream, whatever you want to call it, for something that I would like you to explain to everyone.
Sure. I can't remember what prompted this particular vision that the Lord gave me. Maybe I was just praying. Maybe after my husband passed, I was looking for purpose, because now I don't know who I'm supposed to be if my future has completely blown up and I don't really know what direction I'm supposed to be
Hmm.
going in. So maybe that was the context. I'm trying to remember why I would be asking for my purpose and what is your plan for my life? So he gave me a vision of a local, I'm going to say motel. The doors open to the outside, like there's no hallways or anything. And
Hmm.
so this local motel, I know exactly where it's at. When he gave me the picture, I knew. And he gave me a vision of the upstairs rooms to be available for, and I couldn't decide which he meant, that whether it was young people aging out of the orphan system, whether it was moms with babies, single mothers, single teen moms, single moms in general with babies,
Hmm.
homeless. There were these people in need, the demographic
Hmm.
that would need some sort of shelter. And then on the bottom, he gave me the vision of offices and businesses and stores, and they
Hmm.
would have reduced rent. But they're part of the agreement for them to be there is that they would train the people that were upstairs. Like they would have to take them in and involve them in their business and let them see
Hmm.
how a business runs. What is the craft behind the particular service or product or whatever that they offer? And so I don't really. That's kind of like the book thing. I don't know that it ever will really be a book or what. I don't know. I still wait on the Lord
Yeah.
to unfold that. But this one here has not come true or
Hmm.
come to reality. And yet I really don't have any direction on that either. So I'm not sure why he would tell me. So I mean, if that's an idea for somebody else, hey, grab it, run with it.
Well, it reminds me of the very first Dream Center. Now there's a bunch of them in major cities, but there was a young man named Matthew Barnett. He wrote a book called The Church That Never Sleeps, and he, to encapsulate it as quickly as possible, had a father who was a pastor of a rather large church in California, and he was supposed to be taking over his dad's church, and somewhere along the line, he had this really big burden on his heart for the fact that why do the church doors close? And he wanted to know how the church could just be meeting all the needs all the time. And so the Dream Center ended up, they had this hospital center that had been empty for a while, and they got the building and they began working on it. And the Dream Center and all of the Dream Centers that are now in existence, they meet all the needs. There are places for people to live who don't have a home. There are places for people who are being abused to get away. There are places for young moms who have children who need assistance. There are places for people in addiction, but they also interactively work with businesses and give them, as they grow and heal and learn new skills, give them places to work, as well as sharing the gospel. And so it's this completely interactive, it reminds me of a beehive, right? It's like community and always going, and there's all these different things moving at all times, and what is produced is sweet. And that's what this reminds me of, but
That's
locally to you.
right. But that's so incredible when you think about the level.
Hmm.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's
it's
impressive.
wild. It's so cool. You really should read the book.
I will.
If nothing else, The Church That Never Sleeps. It's an oldie but a goodie. And as I said, now there's dream centers in a lot of major cities. But that was the first one. And it just came from one person having something on their heart, you know? And that's what I'm hearing. He's giving you a vision. He's giving you a heart for this. Whether it actually becomes that thing at that place or whether it's your heart that he takes into a ministry, I don't know. But I'll definitely be leaning into prayer on that for you because that's exciting. That to me, that's church.
Yeah.
That's ministry.
Um,
That's, yeah,
yeah.
that would get me excited.
I know one of the things the Lord has taught me over the years is to hold on loosely because I used to try to put him in a box. Let's say this as an
Yeah,
example.
yeah.
The book that I thought it was a book, and you couldn't
Hmm.
have told me anything different. It was a book. I'm going for a book, and I would have been so frustrated with the Lord about not
Hmm.
finding the book. Where's the book? And so I have learned, but prior to that, hold on loosely because God gives us symbolism and He gives
Yeah.
us analogies
Yes.
and things like that.
Yeah.
So let Him be who He is and not put Him in a box for who I thought He should, would,
Hmm.
or could be.
Yeah, you're making me remember a long time ago I had somebody speak a word over me, and everything that they said was accurate to the point where I was a little freaked out. It was so accurate. But one of the things that they said that I held on to because I never could figure it out, and I tried to do the same thing. Well, I don't know what that God had said that He was going to give me a key and that he had this ministry for me for the rest of my life. I was going to have a spirit of motherhood and I was going to minister to the orphanic spirit, but he was going to give me a key in order to do that. And when I look back now, the key is story, helping people share their story. That's the key. So I would never have thought that was the key. At one point, I thought maybe it was gratitude because that was kind of the overarching theme of my ministry. But no, it's story. I look back, I have always tried to engage in connecting with people in their stories. And now I get to help people share their stories all over the world all the time. I'm writing a book that's going to help people share their stories. And the more it unfolds, the more I realize, oh, you did. That is the key to what you have me here for. And you're using everything about who I am to do it. It's nothing like how I would have articulated it. And so we have to, you're right, hold it loosely, be very open minded to the fact that God's ways are higher than our ways and greater than our ways. And also know He's not going to leave you guessing. He is going to continue to speak into what He has for you.
And to your point, people say money makes the world go around. I believe story makes the world go around because that's what we
Amen.
use every day to connect
Hmm.
with each other.
Amen. Every civilization, whether you can write or read or not, there's oral tradition, there's written form. It's always been, and it's the thing that connects us. It is the way we go into all the world. And I always say this, I always say I feel like God's trying to throw a net over the world and it is made up of our stories and there's all these holes in the net. So we're got to get more and more people sharing because that's how we're going to reach everybody.
Yeah, agree.
Now, I have one more question for you. We could probably get a cup of coffee and talk for a few more hours, but in light of time, if you could go back and give your younger self any advice, what would that be?
Well, since I've been able to practice it two times prior to this, I can answer immediately because it is the thing that I would tell my younger self, and it would be find your identity in Christ. Identity is everything. It
Mm,
dictates
hmm.
your decisions. It dictates the way you perceive yourself. It dictates your worth to you. And so identity, and you're only going to find it in the heart of the one who created you because he
Hmm.
knows you intimately. He has placed things in you that he wants to reveal to you about
That's right.
who you are to him, what you are to accomplish in this life. What is
Hmm.
your purpose? So I say identity is one of the most powerful things you will ever have to invest in
Yeah.
because it dictates everything.
It does. It shifts everything into focus because when I know I'm a child of God, I know He is my Father. I know who He is, and I can let go of the things I'm not supposed to do and let Him do them. And I can just be a child who's chosen and loved and cared for.
And that's so again, the yoke that's so light. We wake up in the morning, we've got a list of things to do, but sometimes the Lord really only requires one or two of those things and he'll handle the rest, meaning
That's
there
right.
he makes room for the rest to be done at maybe at a later
Mm-hmm.
time, at a different way. I don't know, because again, he's so creative, you're not going to
Hmm.
put him in a box. I mean, you can always count on his character and his nature, but
Hmm.
you won't put him in a box as to how he'll show up in your life.
That's right. And honestly, if you start your day with Him, and you give Him all the time you have, and sometimes even a little extra time that you don't think you have. When you enter into the day, everything gets done and it gets done better.
I'm agreeing with you on that because what investment you make in him, let's say you give him 3 minutes, he'll
Hmm.
give you 3 hours, 30
Yeah.
hours,
Yeah.
whatever of value for the
Hmm.
little bit that we invest in him.
Yeah.
It's
That's
one of
right.
the things he said to me when I was just crying out in him because I was going from this label of wife to widow and I didn't even like it, but I didn't have a choice. And he said to me, Sherry, I don't care what this world tries to label you with, weight your neck with, put on you. You
Hmm.
keep your eyes on me because I'm writing a much bigger love story with you as the individual I created you to be, an
Yeah.
overarching love story, you and me. So you keep your eyes on me. And so that really calmed down my anxiety and again healed another layer of that
Yeah.
struggle.
Okay, I guess this is the last one for the recording, but God is dropping another memory in my mind, and I just want to share this with you. So I'm a digger, and I'm a word nerd, and I like to know little details and things, right? So when I read the Bible, I go looking all over the place, and where Jesus says, and you've referred to His burden being light a few times. My burden is light. My yoke is easy. My burden is light. I looked into yokes because we don't really have oxen and yokes these days. But back in the time when Jesus was alive, there were fields that needed to be plowed. And what they would do is they would normally put a younger oxen with a more well-seasoned oxen. They would teach one another. And what would happen is if something happened to one of them, you would think you would just plop another one into the yoke with them. But no. Now, see, those yokes were specially made. They only fit those two oxen. And so when Jesus says, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. He's saying, when I come and I get yoked to you with the Holy Spirit, I am yoked to you in a way that I am not yoked to any other person. You and I are yoked to each other uniquely. And no one else could just pop in that place. It's very special. And I will help you carry the burden and it will be light. And so just that little bit of knowledge of the way that things were and how yokes were used or not used. They used to burn them afterwards because they couldn't use them.
Mhm.
Isn't that crazy?
It is crazy, but it does speak to the uniqueness of the
Mm-hmm.
living God and
Yeah. So
how
you're
he.
you're so special to him that even the way he's connected and yoked with the Holy Spirit to you is unique and it can't fit anybody else.
Mhm. Beautiful.
So cool. Well,
Mhm.
my friend, we did it.
We'll see.
Persistence for the win. No, shh. Anyway, it was wonderful spending this time with you. And if nothing else, I have just really enjoyed having a couple conversations with you more than we normally have time for. And I think it's just that we need to keep on doing that. And I will definitely make time to try and stay connected. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to share your story.
Thank you for having me on. I have thoroughly enjoyed it. What a blessing. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.
Hey, so I just want to thank you so much for spending your time with me. And I want to challenge you to go out today and to just take notice and to stop and really look around and find at least one good thing, one thing to be thankful for. You know, if you do that today, you're going to find so many more things tomorrow without even trying. Because once you start, you begin to see what's always been there. And if you need a refill, you can come join me again for another cup. Make sure to subscribe and have an awesome day and go be grateful.